So, Renato, can Trump's DOJ make a criminal case against Adam Schiff and Letitia James?
It's complicated. I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And I'm Asha Rangappa. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent, and I'm a legal and national security analyst.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down into a soundbite or a skit. So, it seems like both Letitia James and Adam Schiff have a lot of legal bills in their future.
Yes, Adam Schiff actually just started a GoFundMe for his legal bills. And we've talked about this before, right? You've talked about how federal investigations are incredibly stressful mentally, and they're also very costly because even if they don't culminate in something or even culminate in a prosecution that's ultimately unsuccessful, you still have to spend a lot of money to get to that point. And I think that's been one of the worries, is that there is a way to weaponize DOJ just to make that happen, even whatever else the legal underpinnings are.
That's right. In many ways, the investigation is the point. Okay, for Trump, being under investigation for many years created a drag on his first term, certainly put a cloud over him during the time period in between his two presidential terms. And I think there's a payback element here where having Letitia James having to squirm and deal with, a criminal investigation is some measure of satisfaction for Trump, or some sort of payback for Trump. And similarly with Adam Schiff, there's this element that, like, hey, if he's setting up a legal defense fund and scrambling around, that's a victory of sorts for Trump and his team.
Yeah, I think that it's important to just do a little bit of recapping here, since so much has happened, because this harkens back to season 1, I think season 3, season 4 of the Trump show. He's angry at Adam Schiff because Adam Schiff was one of the people on the House Intelligence Committee when the Russia investigation was going on, and was very much, in the weeds on that when there was all this legal wrangling between him and Devin Nunes, about that investigation. Later on, he was one of the lead lawyers on the impeachment trial.
Right, he was the impeachment manager.
Impeachment manager. Was it impeachment 1 or 2?
I believe it was impeachment. I think it was
1. I think it was impeachment 1 too. And then Letitia James, of course, brought a civil suit against the Trump Organization for fraud in terms of misrepresenting the valuation of Trump's properties. This was a bench trial that we talked about a lot on this podcast, and how his lawyers were antagonizing the judge, and you were like, this is not a good idea for them to be doing. And then he got slapped with, I think, close to a $500 million fine, which I think is still on appeal. But he's also, this was, I thought, interesting and a little weird, I guess, also a part of what he is upset about with Letitia James is that she also brought a civil suit against the NRA.
Correct.
And for I guess, they're a nonprofit, but I think there was like mismanagement of their funds, and Wayne LaPierre, who was the president stepped down, and then they reorganized their leadership. But this is all wrapped up. So there's also, I just say this to say that there's also a vendetta that's being brought on behalf of the NRA, which was, which is sort of a new player. And I don't think a lot of people really paid attention to that lawsuit while it was going on, though. That was important as well at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was, I'd say, in many ways, the death of a force on the right for quite some time, and the NRA was seen as this unstoppable force that made it impossible for there to be gun reform. And then suddenly, it seemed like the NRA imploded, and Letitia James and her suit had something to do with that, at the very least. Definitely put some
And
pressure.
which, by the way, also has a lobbying arm that contributes to Republican candidates and to presidential elections. So
absolutely. So let's maybe talk a little bit about what the allegations center around here. I think for James, we'll put her to the side in one sense because there's some separate, I'd say, special claims there. But the main focus here, for Schiff, and I believe there's also a claim against James, is mortgage fraud. But the mortgage fraud claim is specifically that they've claimed the primary residence of their home of multiple. Basically, they've claimed multiple homes to be their primary residence, according to internal leaks from the Trump administration.
Okay, so there's a bunch of different allegations, which I looked all these up. Okay. So for Schiff, yes, so the allegation is that he falsified bank and property records between 2003 and 2019 to be able to get more favorable loan terms on a property in Potomac, in Maryland, by claiming it as a primary residence, while simultaneously claiming a condo in Burbank, California, as his primary residence. So it's about like which of these he was declaring as his primary residence. I think that this is, I haven't been able to actually like get the details on where this happened, but I do recall reading that it's like there's conflicting declarations. In other words, it's possible that these were, a mistake. You've gotten a mortgage before. I mean, there's a lot of paperwork involved, so that's what his defense is. And then he's also accused of failing to disclose his mortgages on his annual financial disclosures prior to 2011. And then similarly, Letitia James, as you noted, there is a similarity of which home she is declaring as her principal residence, because she has a property in Norfolk, Virginia, and she also has a place in New York. But then there's also allegations for her that she misrepresented the number of units in a Brooklyn property that she owned. There's one document which says it's a 4-unit dwelling, even though it has 5 units. And that she listed her father as her husband when they purchased a property together in 1983 and 2000. Again, I think that there are conflicting documents where it was listed correctly on some and then incorrectly on the other, and they're saying that those are false. My point is that this is all I just like to highlight kind of themes, which is, do you remember when all of the lawsuits and even the criminal case against Trump was being brought for falsifying business records,
right?
And for bank fraud, and it was being chalked. It was, you're making a mountain out of a molehill for these paperwork errors, and so there is some irony here.
There is some irony,
in terms of like how in terms of the very specific things that they are now homing in on to kind of center the criminal cases on.
Right. And, obviously also, Trump in the civil suit that James' office brought, there was obviously a lot of allegations regarding misrepresentations related to properties, right? And how property
values. Right.
Correct. And yes. So, but, just let's take a zoom out here for a minute.
Let's zoom out.
Okay, because Trump keeps calling this mortgage fraud. I've tried mortgage fraud cases, multiple mortgage fraud cases myself. Usually, mortgage fraud involves in simplest way, mortgage fraud is when you make false statements in an application for a mortgage, and you do that in order to obtain the mortgage, to deceive the bank into giving you a mortgage that you otherwise shouldn't have received. Often the classic mortgage fraud scheme is where, for example, you inflate the value of a property. You make it suggest that it's worth, several $100,000 when it's only worth $100,000, something like that. Sometimes you have what's called a straw buyer, who is somebody with a clean credit rating but not much income, and you fabricate the income of that person through false documents. Usually it's something pretty egregious like that because, as you point out, Asha, there's a heck of a lot of forms here. And it's easy for someone to say that they just made a mistake. You don't commit fraud by mistake. You don't if you check the wrong box on a form, that doesn't mean you've committed fraud. You actually have to act with the intent to defraud, and that's usually what the defense is in a mortgage fraud case. So here, just to kind of bring it to what we're talking about here, if it's in fact the case that Schiff, let's say hypothetically, listed as his primary residence both a place in California as well as a place near D.C. Obviously, as a member of Congress, he spends a lot of time probably in both locations if he represents California, and he's in D.C. quite a bit. It's understandable that he may have, clicked about the primary residence on both. His defense is likely going to be, well, I wasn't trying to defraud somebody. I just happened to, check a certain box in both of those forms.
Yeah, and I think his defense is also, because he's made a statement to this effect, that, I'm a member of Congress, and it's very obvious that, like many people, I have two residences. So, in other words, this would be, he's going to the intent element, that
right.
This would be a dumb way to try to, pull something over on the bank. And I will just add to your intent piece that I think, as with most false statements, false filings, and things like that, it also has to be a material fact that is misrepresented. In other words, it has to be a fact that would have materially altered something, right? Like as you said, would have gotten the loan, or better terms, or no. I mean, I don't know, because they did prosecute Hunter Biden for, saying he wasn't, but that was material, because that would have actually disqualified him.
Yeah, so this materiality, it's interesting. It's something I've spent a lot of time briefing. Materiality, all the requirements that it's capable of influencing the recipient. So here, was it capable of influencing the bank? Yeah, potentially, whether it's your primary residence. I mean, I think if you had a slam dunk intent documents, like let's say there was text messages or emails that Schiff was sending right at the same time, like, ha ha ha, I'm putting this as my primary residence, even though it's not, because I want to get favorable loan terms or something along those lines, then perhaps you might have a case there. But I think that this is the sort of case that wouldn't ordinarily get brought, because establishing the intent element is hard. I think you're right that on materiality, he'd have an argument that it wouldn't have mattered to the bank. I think that, and I assume the prosecution here, their argument's going to have to be that he's misrepresenting his primary residence for political reasons, that he's trying to suggest he doesn't live in D.C. when in fact he does, something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that if listing two residences as primary residences, if that was done intentionally and consistently across all of the documents, would be a material fact. But something like saying that there's a 4-unit dwelling versus a 5-unit, especially if it's in one document versus several, like that that seems like an obvious error.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it gets to what we started this on, which is we're now in the weeds on how this case would be proved to a jury. And it doesn't even need to get that far for this to be, a real pain for these people. And my question is, I was talking to you earlier, some of this stuff, goes back a number of years in terms of, what's being alleged. And again, we don't have any charging documents. Normally we wouldn't even know that this was being investigated, right? DOJ would be
Right.
quietly, FBI would be quietly doing this until, the indictment dropped or something. We wouldn't know. But it does seem that, at least based on, whatever's been kind of thrown out there, a lot of it is from a while ago. So I would think that the statute of limitations would have run on a lot of these, but they can still, they can still do, I am assuming they can still do the investigation, even if it's something that they wouldn't charge.
That's an interesting one. So first of all, I don't know if you can actually, if it's proper for you to conduct a grand jury investigation into allegations for which the statute of limitations is ended. So I think that's an interesting question, one that I don't know off the top of my head. I think an argument could be made that they could not. But I mean, the statute of
Well, who would stop
limitations.
them?
Well, I guess, yeah, okay. I'm
Who
talking
would
about
stop
what's appropriate. Yeah, I'm talking about whether it's a proper
Oh,
use of the
okay. We'll
grand
get
jury.
into some of the what's appropriate in a second. Go
Okay,
ahead.
but a couple of thoughts on statute of limitations. So first of all, when fraud, the typical statute of limitations for a federal fraud case is 5 years. However, if that fraud impacts a financial institution, then it's 10 years. So that's the first thing. And I think at least for Schiff, there's maybe one application that was in 2019. So that would be within the last 10 years. So that's the first thing. Second of all, when you have a scheme to defraud, the scheme can be ongoing for some period of time. So presumably what they're going to do is suggest that he's continued to conceal his false, his scheme or something along those lines up until the present day or for many years afterwards, something along those lines. And they'll try to argue that there's some sort of act of concealment. I mean, Trump claims in his without basis or without for offering any basis, publicly that Schiff engages in a pattern of mortgage fraud. And, there's certainly a suggestion that there's a substantial investigation there. And so, they may try to turn this into a pattern of activity, which would explain how they could get around the statute of limitations.
Yeah. Well, the pattern actually seems to be using mortgage fraud as a way to go after people, because just today, the Trump administration suggesting that they're going to go after a Federal Reserve Governor, Lisa Cook, for alleged mortgage fraud. And this was, I think alarming, because the referral for her to DOJ came from the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, who is a Trump, I guess, appointee and clearly, a political ally of Trump. So, if this is something that you can argue is ongoing and there's never any statute of limitations or something, these documents will be so voluminous that you can very easily, I would think, go on a fishing expedition, find something inconsistent, and find ways to target people, and that's alarming.
Yeah, well, I would say that and this is part of the reason why I say it's complicated. I don't know whether every mortgage application has a false statement in it. I mean, I don't know whether that's true or not. I do think
I didn't say that everyone did.
Right.
I'm just saying that
Right.
it's a easy kind of thing that is in the possession of the executive branch.
Or they can get their hands on it.
Yeah, exactly. And then they can hang their hat on it and kind of do what they're doing.
Well, what I was going to say, I mean, what my point was that I don't know whether every mortgage application has a false statement, but it's not every false statement is a conviction for mortgage fraud. However, I do think that false statements can give rise, if you want to, you could use that as the basis of investigating. And I think that, part of what's going on here, and that's why I view this as a somewhat complicated thing, is I can see the administration using these, stray false statements to investigate matters that would not otherwise be investigated and bring charges, even potentially, that may not actually be meritorious charges, that are charges that you would never ordinarily bring and couldn't get proven beyond a reasonable doubt, but will impose significant costs. And it's interesting, I will just say, it looks like, from my perspective, from the outside, I don't know any details. It looks to me like James is better situated, ironically, than Schiff in the long run here, because Schiff's has hired Preet Bharara, who's at an expensive law firm, and he appears to be charging Schiff at least something, because Schiff's opened up a fund to fund this. Now, he's a sitting senator, and he can raise money and so on. It's a big state. California's a pretty big, rich state. But it's notable that he's in that situation, whereas Letitia James is being represented by Abby Lowell, who left Winston and Strawn to form his own small firm, to handle that case and other cases like it. And he's at his stage of his career where I think, he's more interested in taking on cases that he feels strongly about than he is about making a top dollar. And so, that's very fortunate situation there, because, for James is a public servant right now, and it can be a challenge, right, to make that work. So, if Trump does go after her, and I should mention that, of course, there's another potential avenue in which Trump, the Trump DOJ is supposedly investigating James. Like, she's going to need that legal defense.
Yeah. I just want to highlight that mortgage fraud was one of the things that Paul Manafort was charged with, and I believe he was convicted for it. That was in his earlier. I'm just pointing out that he was pardoned, and in other words, there's just this inconsistency in how these things are seen, which belie that these are good faith investigations, which get to the inappropriateness. Both of these investigations are being handled by Ed Martin. Is that right? As a special prosecutor, it's not clear to me exactly what the Justice Department is doing, but he was camped out in front of Letitia James's house.
Yeah, which is pretty odd.
And told her that she needed to resign.
Highly questionable. Yeah. Then you saw he sent her a letter suggesting it would be good faith or something along those lines. It would get her like brownie points if she resigned. And then he's taking photos outside her house. I mean, he is in many ways a gift to the Letitia James defense team, because he doesn't know how to conduct grand jury investigations. He doesn't know how to operate within the bounds of the Justice Manual and the usual procedures that U.S. attorneys and assistant U.S. attorneys follow. So he's sort of off doing his own thing. That is only providing fodder, really, for James and her attorneys, Abby Lowell, to be noting that this is happening. Ironically, Ed Martin heads up the weaponization section, or whatever, the weaponization team at the Justice Department. Sort of ironic, because he's supposedly looking at the prior administration's quote unquote weaponization of the Justice Department. But of course, that's one of those like war is peace 1984 Orwellian references to this administration, because of course, what he's really doing is weaponizing the current DOJ against Letitia James.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that his bar license is still active, given all the things that he's been doing, right? I mean, before he had his failed bid to be the U.S. attorney for D.C., I mean, he was representing, the January 6th people, and then also asking with his DOJ hat on for the the case against those people to be dismissed. And here, by the way, I do think that Schiff also may have a gift, because Schiff sent a complaint to the DC bar about Ed Martin. And that seems like a very clear conflict for then Ed Martin to be the prosecutor on the case against Schiff. I mean, that seems like something that is unethical. I mean, I realize that that's not surprising to anyone, but unethical in a way that ought to, it may impact the actual case, right?
Yeah, it's certainly something that I would raise if I was representing Schiff, for sure. I think it's interesting. I don't really know what Ed Martin's role is in any investigation of Adam Schiff. In other words, Ed Martin doesn't appear to be qualified to investigate anyone. I don't know if he knows how to conduct a grand jury investigation. So I don't know what he's doing other than writing letters and posing for photos. Like, he strikes me as a guy who's, he's around, but I'm not sure what he's actually
Dan
done.
Bondi has appointed to handle these cases.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. I know he's involved in these cases. I just don't know what his actual role is, or later on, if he's supposedly, oh no, he was just,
he's a special prosecutor.
Special prosecutor. He's definitely very special. So,
yeah.
So let's talk about, speaking of special, let's talk about another very special investigation of Letitia James, because she's also being investigated for 18 U.S.C. 232, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, which is really something. Usually that statute's a very old and broad statute. It essentially says that if you're a public official and you're depriving somebody of their civil rights, when under color of law, what that means is that you're doing so, saying that you're doing it for a legal purpose. In other words, let's say you're a police officer and you kidnap someone and claim that you're doing it because it's part of an investigation. That's I would say a paradigmatic case of a 232 violation. Like, you're kidnapping Black people in the South, and you're doing it because claiming that it's part of some investigation or law enforcement duty that you have. But what they're doing is they're investigating Letitia James, claiming that her investigation of Trump deprived Trump of his rights in some way, which I find interesting because he had attorneys and it seemed like he got due process and so forth. But it's quite ironic in ways, because one of the elements of a 232 violation is willfulness. In other words, you had to know that you were and believe that you were breaking the law and doing it. So in my example of the kidnapper, like you're a cop, but you're really kidnapping Black people and lynching them. No one really believes that that's a law enforcement duty. Here, I just, it's completely unfathomable to me how you could possibly prove in front of any jury that Letitia James believed that she was violating Trump's civil rights. It's really an amazing, charge to investigate, in my opinion.
Especially when the judge was continuing to entertain the case and, rule on all of the objections that Trump was putting forth. I'll just add that deprivation of rights was yet another charge that Trump was charged with on January 6th himself.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think what the goal here is it certainly muddies the waters, right? And makes it so that they can say, well, one person's weaponization is another person's justice. And so this is just our flip side of the same coin. And so it's a way of, in many ways, trying to vindicate Trump by saying, well, people everyone is making these allegations against each other. So it means nothing that Trump was charged with all of these crimes.
That's right.
And that's what this is all about. That, and putting a lot of pressure and pain on, Letitia James and Adam Schiff.
Well, it's unfortunate that DOJ has been weaponized, that they're acting in ways that are really outside the bounds of how the DOJ normally operates, which is to speak with their filings, etc. So we'll see if they're actually able to, you know, I mean, I think the proof will be in the pudding if they actually get a real indictment. I mean, not that that can't be based on something, flimsy already, but I think the big takeaway here is that we are seeing the weaponization. I think people, jump immediately to, if they're charged, and there is just so much that can happen before that can be very vexing and burdensome to the target. And I think especially if you have an FBI that's being purged and replaced with people who are willing to do this, though I'm not really clear that the new agents that Kash Patel wants to hire without any college degree, or, he wants to cut the Quantico training in half. I don't know that these are the kinds of people who will be able to do mortgage fraud investigations. But it is a whole transformation of how the entire Justice Department operates.
Well, that's right. And while this isn't the main topic we're discussing, it's worth noting that news also broke this week that Kash Patel is trying to turn the FBI into a violent crimes focused force, where essentially the agents now are going to be, he's reducing the current workforce and then hiring agents and focusing them on violent crime, which has not been the focus of the FBI. Really, in many ways, the focus of the FBI has been national security and, other types of more complex crimes, whether it's financial crimes, public corruption, and so on.
Yeah, that have an interstate component. And these new people that he's hiring, he is cutting out the college degree requirement. He is cutting out, more than half the training at Quantico. I went through it. It's a lot of legal training. He's cutting out the academics, quote unquote, which is mostly legal training. So it's going to be a different FBI.
That's right. And that's a sort of thing, we've talked in the past about what Trump can do and what he can't do easily. And I do think changing, but through hiring and firing, or pressuring people out and then hiring, changing the culture of a workplace is something that can happen relatively quickly.
So, Renato, I was on Blue Sky the other day, and there was a post from Hakeem Jeffries, which is really bland and anodyne, and talking about, the reckless Republican policies that have made things so expensive. Meanwhile, DC is under occupation, and people were slamming him. And I joined in and said, do you have any idea what's going on? And there were a lot of people who, I think a lot of people who shared that feeling, because I think that this old kind of messaging is just not working in terms of cutting through the noise. And one thing that has cut through the noise is the latest tack from Gavin Newsom, who's now mimicking Trump speak. And frankly, it's absolutely hilarious, but more importantly, it gets attention.
It definitely has gotten a lot of attention. I mean, basically what's happened, if you're not paying attention to this, the X account, Twitter account for Gavin Newsom's press team has been turned into essentially a Trumpy account, basically glorifying Newsom in the way that Trump glorifies himself. And it's been interesting because it's, X is increasingly the backyard of the conservatives, so it's in their hornet's nest. And it's getting them riled up because they're like, hey, why is Newsom talking this way? And this is not becoming of a leader and this and that. And of course, the joke is that all he's doing is mimicking and mocking Trump. And so if you have a problem with the governor of California acting this way, then presumably you have a problem when the president of the United States acts basically the same way, or in a more exaggerated way, and in a doing it without mocking anyone, just because that's who he is. And so there is a certain irony to it, and it's definitely making a point. I wonder, Asha, though, like at what point does the joke cease to become a joke? In other words, right now it's mockery. Is this going to be the new messaging for Gavin Newsom for years to come?
I mean, maybe as long as Trump is in office, I don't see it as just mockery, right? We are in an attention economy, which means that things that get clicks is what is going to rise to the top of the marketplace of ideas. And I teach this in my class on disinformation and social media, which is, we have this model of free speech, which is this marketplace model. And the idea is that we don't have the government come in and censor or do anything because the market will take care of it. The best ideas are going to rise to the top and the bad ideas are just going to float away and disappear. And that's obviously not the case in our ecosystem, because social media and algorithms don't reward the best speech. They reward the speech that gets the most engagement. And what we found is that that's typically speech that gets you angry, that is false because it's outrageous. And Trump does both. And he has the megaphone of the president of the United States. So he is really able to hijack our information ecosystem. And so when you have Chuck Schumer tweeting about the price of avocado toast, or Hakeem Jeffries, doing his robot routine, it's just not going to work. It's not business as usual. So what I think is important, I don't know if it's going to be how it continues, but what I like about this is that it's disrupting the existing model. It's causing a disruption. It's forcing the attention to go to him. And I think changing the conversation, because now, there is a conversation that's like, is this the way that we need to communicate? I mean, better for me that, in my opinion, that he's using that to, by the way, he's not just mocking, he is making political points in there, right? He's one of his posts was if Texas keeps going down this road, we're going to have, we're going to bigly, increase our seats too. But he's making, I think, policy and political points, substantive points, but he's doing it through the vehicle that will garner attention.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I mean, look, obviously, you're right about the attention economy. I don't think, I think that's the reality. I don't think that's a good thing for democracy or our country, but it is what it is. I think from my perspective, I agree that it's better to have something that's cutting through the noise than something that's not. But I think it's refreshing and it's fun because it does sort of cut against the Trumpian messaging, and it subtly is a jab. All of it is a jab at Trump in so many ways, and most of it is just trolling, where it's essentially like a huge honor. It's reposting memes of Gavin Newsom shirtless, via AI, the way that Trump's
his face on Mount Rushmore.
Right. So that's what a lot of it is. But I think what really people need to do is find an authentic voice for themselves that is different and fresh and more made for the social media age. I mean, to me, the person on the left who's done that the best is AOC, who has a massive social media following and raises more money, I think, than far more money than the DCCC and all the other Democrats in the House combined. And, ultimately that's because she's on Instagram Live chatting with people and talking about her life and how things impact her and her perspective in a way that is very authentic. You may disagree with her politics. You may not like her personally, but there's no question that many, many, many millions of people are paying attention to her Instagram and paying attention to her having live talks with them and stuff in a way that they just aren't paying attention to the average Dem who's doing things in a much more mainstream political way.
I think it can be yes and. I think that works for her. She is incredibly charismatic. She has the ability to to do that, and her specific policy positions command a segment of the left. But there are a lot of people who don't, and there are a lot of people who are not going to, follow her or be as, excited or inspired by her, but who will be by Newsom, who I think is more to the center. So, I mean, I think, people really underestimate the well-oiled machine that is the right-wing media ecosystem. And there is a unified messaging. There is a insular, kind of closed system where they're not exposed to anything outside. I will say, as you noted, Fox News is talking about Gavin Newsom and his tweets. That's actually a good thing, because it means that the people in that bubble are actually going to go look at it. They also cover AOC because, but I think the thing with AOC, though, is that, they use her as a foil. And they're kind of doing that with Gavin too, but I think that it's his tactic right now is confusing them.
Yeah,
and I think
it
that's
is.
good. Like I said, I think disruption is good in this because we need something.
I hear you.
It's not a sustainable situation to continue the way we are.
But I hear you. But I also don't think it's sustainable to have your public messaging completely derivative of the other guy. So that's why I'm saying that ultimately we need to find leaders who are having a communication style that's not purely a mimicry. Aping what the other side is doing. It's interesting and fun here because it's really a mockery of what his communication style is, because it is on its face so bizarre and so unprecedented. So that just having a leader act that way that's not him makes the point in a very good way. But that's at a certain point, like after years of doing that, like then it loses it's no longer new. It's no longer fresh. It's just the same thing. And it's not him. So
but come on, Renato. We're not years in. We're like a week in.
No, but my point is the challenge is to find something that's fresh, that's interesting, that lasts. And that's the reason I use AOC as an example, because AOC is doing her thing. And I appreciate that she's not Newsom and that there's a different lane for somebody like Newsom. But my point is that she's doing her thing, and it has been lasting for years. And she's got a huge following and raking in massive fundraising totals and using small dollars and things like that. So it's working for her. That's the point I'm making. More people in politics need to be finding ways to use social media, cut through the noise, like you said in the beginning, and have kind of a really authentic voice that is going to get the clicks and views, but that lasts the test of time.
I'm happy with disruptors who are pro-democracy, however they're doing it at this moment. I'm interested, maybe our listeners can give their view and see. And I am giving Gavin Newsom my green light to continue, because also I think it's hilarious.
I do too. It's very funny, and the perfect isn't the enemy of the good, I'll say. So, Asha, before we go, you were going to be taking your son to college. Did that end up happening this week?
It did. And it was harder than I thought.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, people talk about it, and I'm not a helicopter mom. I'm not like, I mean, I'm a tiger mom, not a helicopter mom. So like, I push my kids, but I don't cling to them. In fact, I want them to be independent. And, my son did a gap year across the world for 10 months. And even like sending him off for that was not as difficult as leaving him at college. It's a strange experience. And, I think part of it is, did you love college?
I did. I loved college. What about you?
Okay. I loved college too. And so, you leave your child and you see, that they have this like exciting adventure in front of them, right? Like these million choices and decisions and things they're going to learn and people they're going to meet, and all these things are going to shape them because you went through it and it was so fun. And it's like, there is both, it's not just, you know, about the kid. It's also like a weird realization that though, like, you'll never have that again for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, we're definitely at a point in our lives where, you know, we're past the middle point in our lives at this point, right? And there's all these experiences that we had and that were so much fun. And we have to, you look back and you're never going to have that again. You're going to have something else, but it's not the same.
And you don't realize when you're in it, like, how awesome it is.
I think that's right. I think that's right. There was definitely, for me, I don't know if it was like this for you, when I graduated from law school and I had my first job, I was clerking. It was like a sudden realization, like, oh yeah, like up until that point, it was all about all these endless possibilities and all these things and all these ideas and paths and this and that. And then suddenly you're like, oh, I got a job. I got to go to work every morning and I got to, you know, make coffee and, you know, for my judge and do all this other stuff. And I'm like, this is very different than what I had been doing for the last 7 years.
Yeah. Well, it was bittersweet. And yeah, I don't know what else there is to say. It's just I've been kind of like, it's I've been a little heartsick is all I can say.
Wow. Well, hopefully Pancake can help fill that hole in your heart.
Yeah, Pancake he's trying. We'll see.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.